Hello and welcome to the Fear Files, where you will hear 3 true scary stories from night shift workers that will seriously make you contemplate whether you want to work nights again. Please like and subscribe to our channel and press the bell notification. The Basement Stranger by Nick Byrne. I used to work as a security guard for a large hospital. My shift was overnight from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and part of my job was doing rounds through the hospital, including the basement which housed the morgue. Even though I'm not easily spooked, the morgue area always gave me an unsettling feeling. The long, dimly lit hallways and the cold, sterile air made it feel like the dead were still lingering down there. One night, around 2 a.m., I got a call from the nurses' station about some strange noises coming from the basement. They were hearing faint banging and shuffling noises. They asked me to check it out, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the stairs. It was eerie and quiet. As I walked through the basement, everything seemed normal at first. The halls were as empty and silent as usual. But when I approached the morgue, I heard it, a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged. My pulse quickened as I turned the corner toward the morgue doors. The noise stopped, and there was only silence. I pushed the door open and flashed my light inside. Empty. No one was there, and nothing seemed out of place. I did a sweep of the room and the adjacent storage area. Still nothing. Just as I was about to leave, the lights flickered, and I heard it again, that scraping sound. This time it was louder and seemed to be coming from behind one of the large storage cabinets. I hesitated for a moment, but then slowly walked over to investigate. As I rounded the cabinet, I froze. Standing in the corner of the room was a man, pale, disheveled, and barefoot. He was staring at the ground, his back hunched unnaturally. My flashlight caught him in its beam, and he looked up at me, his eyes wide and empty. Before I could say anything, he turned and bolted down the hall toward the exit. I radioed for backup and ran after him, but by the time I got to the stairwell, he was gone. We searched the entire hospital that night, every floor, every room, but there was no sign of him. No patients matching his description, no visitors unaccounted for. It was as if he had just vanished. The strange part, the next day, I learned that the morgue had received a body earlier that evening. An unidentified man who had been found wandering barefoot on the highway before collapsing and dying of a heart attack. The staff had placed him in the storage unit just hours before. I saw the man in the basement. I still get chills thinking about it. Needless to say, I was a little more cautious on my rounds after that night. The night shift devil, Jeff Hughes. My name is Jeff, and I work as concierge on apartment block from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. The block that I work in used to be an old military building in the northwest of England. After the military moved out, it became the apartment block that it is today, with 136 apartments. When I started working here, straight away from the very first shift, I had that feeling that someone was watching me, even though I was on my own. When I was on my patrols, I never seen or heard anything, though, other than this. After a month, this all changed when I was patrolling the basement. I heard a conversation which I thought was strange, as it was 3 a.m. in the morning midweek. and I was certain there were people in the basement having a conversation. I looked around everywhere and there was no one at all in the basement. I went freezing cold and started to get scared and panic as the conversation was still going on and I could hear it, and there was no one there. I shouted, "Stop," and I am almost certain that whatever it was answered me back with a shout of something that I could not make out. I eventually went back upstairs after what seemed hours, which was realistically only about 15 minutes. All was quiet for the rest of the week. It was quiet, and I went off on my 2 days off, and I came back. This was to be one of my last ever shifts I would work there, as I was that scared. The shift began as normal, and I was saying hi and smiling at the resident when they would walk through the door, as our desk was situated to the left as soon as they would walk through the door. A new resident walked through the door. As they scanned through, I smiled and said hi, like I do to all the residents, and a white female with dark, piercing eyes just stared back at me without saying hi or a smile. I checked the key log system on the computer to see what apartment she moved into, and she had moved into apartment 66. I thought this was strange, as 2 days before my last day of work, a lovely Arabic family was still living in that apartment. The next night, all was normal till about 1 a.m. in the morning, until a young Arabic girl came running into the foyer screaming her dad was dead in bed. I ran up to the apartment, and sadly there was nothing that could be done. It was then I went cold and realized that this is the family in apartment 69 where the woman with the dark eyes was supposed to be living. I asked the young female where was the lady who had dark eyes. She looked at me strangely and said there was only her family there and no one else. I felt sick, thinking I was going mad or something. I decided to check the CCTV, and lo and behold, there she was scanning the fob and walking through the foyer. And next, the female was spotted on the 5th floor camera where apartment 69 was situated. The female was standing in the corridor looking up into the camera with the wicked, scariest smile I have ever seen. The lady then walked up the corridor, and you never see her again on either camera, on either side of the corridor. That was my last ever shift on there, and I would never go back again. I was convinced I had seen an evil spirit, maybe even the devil itself. I have gone cold just writing this story out for you, and I honestly believe whatever she was the reason the man had passed away. Title: The Graveyard Shift. Paul Smith. I never believed in ghosts. I was always the practical type. You know, the guy who chalks things up to coincidence or logic. But there are some things you can't explain away. I learned that the hard way during my time working the night shift at a small town hospital. It was a quiet place way out in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't a huge hospital, just big enough to serve a town that barely made it onto any map. The kind of place where nothing much happens until something does. That's where I come in. My name's Mark, and back then I was an overnight security guard. I used to enjoy the peace and quiet of the night shift. I didn't mind the isolation. Sure, it got a little boring, but the stillness had its own rhythm. I'd just do my rounds, grab a cup of coffee, maybe chat with a nurse or two, and then wait for my shift to end. But there was one thing about the hospital that never sat right with me. The fourth floor, it was shut down, had been for years, long before I started working there. The higher-ups said it was due to budget cuts, but there were rumours among the staff, whispers of something that happened there, an accident or something worse. No one really knew the full story, but everyone avoided that floor like it was cursed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Floors get shut down all the time in hospitals, but something about the way people avoided even talking about it felt off. I started noticing weird things about 2 weeks into my job. It always seemed to happen during the dead of night, around 3 a.m., the witching hour, they call it. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps coming from the fourth floor, slow shuffling, like someone dragging their feet. At first I thought it was just the building settling, but the sounds were too distinct, too human. One night, curiosity got the better of me and I took the elevator up to the fourth floor. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some teenagers sneaking in for a thrill, or a homeless guy looking for shelter. But when the doors slid open, the air hit me like a wall. It was cold, unnaturally cold. My breath fogged up in front of me, and the lights flickered for a moment before going completely out. I stood there frozen, staring into the pitch black hallway. Suddenly I heard it again, those footsteps. They were coming from down the hall, getting louder. My pulse quickened and a strange dread crept over me. I should have just gone back downstairs, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I don't know if it was fear or fascination, but I couldn't move. The footsteps stopped. Then, just when I thought it was over, I heard something else, a whisper. Soft at first, like someone was talking from far away, but it got louder, clearer, until I could make out the words, "Help me." I felt a chill run down my spine. My hand instinctively went to my flashlight and I flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing. No one. Just an empty hallway lined with closed doors to abandoned rooms. I took a few steps forward, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't believe in ghosts, I kept telling myself. There had to be a rational explanation for all of this. But the deeper I went into the hallway, the more that logic unraveled. I stopped outside one of the rooms. The door was slightly ajar. I don't know why I reached for the handle, but I did. As soon as I touched it, the door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in moonlight from a single cracked window. In the middle of the room, there was a bed, old, rusty, and covered in a thin layer of dust. And lying on that bed was a figure. At first, I thought it was a mannequin or a prop, but then it moved. Just a slight twitch, like a reflex. I took a step closer, shining my light on it. It was a woman, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. She didn't look alive, but she wasn't dead either. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The woman turned her head slowly, her lips barely moving as she whispered again, "Help me." Before I could react, her body convulsed violently. The bed shook, the metal frame screeching against the floor as she thrashed. I backed away, stumbling into the hallway. The door slammed, shut behind me with a deafening bang. I bolted for the elevator, not daring to look back. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to hit the button. When the doors finally opened, I all but dove inside. As they closed, I saw it. The woman standing at the end of the hall, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, watching me with those dead, hollow eyes. The ride down to the lobby felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, I stumbled out, gasping for air. The bright lights and hum of the hospital were a welcome relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I rushed back to the security office and locked the door behind me. For the rest of my shift, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that woman standing in the corner of the room. But nothing happened. The sun eventually came up, and with it, the rational part of my brain returned. I convinced myself it was just a dream, stress, exhaustion, maybe even a hallucination. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Who would believe me anyway? A few nights later, I found out the truth. I was doing my rounds again, trying not to think about the 4th floor, when one of the older nurses approached me. She was a quiet woman, always kept to herself, but that night she seemed uneasy. "You've been here a while now, haven't you?" she asked. "Yeah, a few weeks," I replied, trying to act casual. "You've been up to the 4th floor, haven't you?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking around as if to make sure no one was listening. "I know what you saw up there. We all do." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What's going on up there?" She hesitated before answering. "Years ago, there was an accident. A patient, a woman, died up there. It was during the night shift. The staff didn't find her until the morning. No one knows how she died, but ever since then, strange things started happening. People would hear her crying or see her walking the halls. We don't talk about it because, well, who would believe us? But everyone knows. We just try to stay away from that floor." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, call it a crazy story, but I couldn't. I had seen her. I had heard her. "Be careful," the nurse warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "Once she knows you've seen her, she doesn't let go." I quit the job a week later. I couldn't stay there, not after what I'd experienced. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there waiting, watching. And every now and then, late at night, I swear I can still hear those footsteps. Slow, shuffling, coming from just down the hall.